just do something. Don't get in this space where you're just like doing nothing because you don't know exactly what to do yet. We want God to kind of lead us, right? And it's like, well, you need to start kind of moving. It's that, hey, I'll show you as you go.
Yeah. So what does the Bible say? Hey, everybody. Thank you for joining us on the podcast today. We are excited.
Yeah.
Got a couple people with us, as we normally do. Sam and Nicole have joined us so that we can have a discussion about a new topic. And that topic has to do with our work. Our
Let's
work,
go. Yeah.
our jobs, and our faith. Because often we kind of put those things in boxes. My job's over here, my work's over here, but I follow Jesus at church. Or at least we don't always intentionally put them in boxes. But we don't know, we don't always know how to connect them together.
Yeah.
And so we want to have this discussion. And we invited Sam and Nicole to be here, particularly because they are young adult pastors at the church. They have been for several years. And it's interesting because if you're around young adults long enough, one of the subjects, there's probably about 3 subjects that come up regularly, but one of them definitely.
Which ones do you think they are?
Just 3, though.
Yeah, let's say, okay, I would say relationships.
Bingo. Yeah.
Calling, work, what am I doing with my life?
Uh-huh.
And what would be the other one? I don't know.
I don't know.
Honestly, I think money's become a
Money.
new one. I remember we
Which is
told
related to
them
work.
and money was above relationships,
I know.
which is crazy.
I was like,
Yeah.
I'm out of
But-
work.
I remember you guys did that series, like What's in the Bag or something like that.
What's in the bag?
We're-
Oh my goodness.
I'm not a young adult, clearly.
Secure the bag.
Sorry.
What's in the bag? It's a rabbit.
Yeah.
Goodness
I don't know all the
I actually
cool.
forgot about that series.
It was that good.
A couple years ago or something, right?
Wow,
Yeah.
you have a good memory.
I don't know why. I
Yeah.
remember seeing it something on social media or something.
Yeah.
But anyway, yes. Wow. So young adults in that season are in a season of life where they're often thinking about work, job, career. What am I going to do with my life? And by the way, there's an overlap here. There's a broader topic that has to do with how we understand our calling. What is God asking us to do with our lives? That there's going to be some overlap in the conversation about that as well. But we invited Sam and Nicole to be here because they walk with young adults, have been for some years now, and this is always a thing that comes up. But I want to say, and they'll agree with me, this topic is not relegated to just young adults. It's relevant to everybody. I'm not a young adult. I care about this. I care about what am I doing for a living? What is my job? How am I using my time? Matters to me as a Christ follower. But we want to talk about the conversation of faith and work. And so maybe I'll just open it up this way. You guys feel free to jump in, correct me, yell at me.
Definitely.
There's going to be a lot of that.
Yeah, do whatever needs to be done to get this conversation going. But I think it's interesting to walk with anyone that's a Christ follower to try to navigate the waters of career, job. Why should I have this job? There's a lot of confusion. Even, I'll say this. Yeah. I'll stop talking at some point, by the way. Okay. But you're waiting. Thank you for confirming what I felt. It is true, biblically, almost as soon as the Bible starts talking about anything, it starts talking about work. In the beginning, at creation, there is this God design around us as human beings and doing work. Whether you are planting vegetables in your backyard, you're a single mom at home, or you're a CEO of a Fortune 500 company, this is all of our work. But we don't always see it that way because all these other things start to come into play, which is what's in the bag. I'm saying it wrong again. Secure the bag. How much money am I making? Right. How much money do I want to make? What defines my identity?
What are other people doing?
Hey, let's go. So let's just start there. How do you guys perceive this whole topic, especially as it relates to young adults and even in your own life? I'd love to hear anything you guys want to talk about in relation to it.
I believe in ladies first, so.
Oh.
Yeah.
He just passed the buck.
I really think how we navigate this is so closely connected to our relationship with God. I think the amount of security that we have in that relationship really defines how stressed we feel about it, how at peace we feel about it. If we're like afraid to make a wrong choice, I think that if we think, no, if I'm outside of God's will, like he'll be angry. I've heard things like that. And so for me, I think that one of the main things that you'll often see rise to the surface is someone feeling like they can like make a wrong choice. And so it's so complex. I think everyone is going to find how they, reach their calling differently. We were just having a conversation about this where it's like, for me, even how I ended up here.
Yeah, talk about that.
Yeah. So
what did you do before this?
I was a teacher.
First of all, you're on staff.
Yeah.
Have been for a few years.
Yes.
Okay.
For
So you were a teacher before
a
that.
lot of years. I was a teacher.
And you were a Christian.
And I was a Christian.
Okay.
Well,
And I'm
somewhere
saying-
in between. Yeah.
somewhere that happened.
Honestly, I was in a relationship when I was young, and that person had a sibling who had special needs. And that kind of just opened up my world. And I'm like, I want to be a teacher. I'm going to do it for special needs kids. And then I ended up at a job at a school with, there was no special needs kids. It was actually a Muslim school. It wasn't even, there was no special, well, not none, but God kind of opened those doors and things. And then I got reached out to like, hey, Nicole, would you want to do special needs here at Cottonwood? And that's what kind of brought me even on staff here, is somebody saying there's a need here. I've always known that I did develop a passion for it. I didn't think it was something that just, God uses everything. So it definitely was something I was passionate about. But at the time, I had prayed, Lord, do you want me to go back to this school? Every year I pray that, do you want me to still stay here? And he had said yes. And so I was like a month or two into the school year when this came up, and I was like, I can't leave. I don't feel like God is like that, where he's like, just begin something and leave in the middle. Yeah. So I was kind of like, I don't think I can do it, because it just wouldn't feel right. And they were like, well, wait until the school year is done. And so for me, it was just very kind of simple in that way. I just felt like, okay, Lord, if you're opening this door, I'm just going to walk through it. I didn't feel any kind of, maybe this is wrong. It just, I don't know. All of wisdom's paths are peace. I just kind of was like, it feels peaceful. I'm just going to go there. And that's not everybody's experience though, which is why I'm like, I really think how you navigate that, and whether or not you have peace, or is this right? I really think that's where a lot of the turmoil, at least in some cases, comes up,
Right. So you were a teacher, you become a Christian. Did that from before you were a Christian to after, did it change the way you viewed your job in any way?
Yeah, I think that I felt, I was already really connected at Cottonwood right before I became a teacher. And I actually remember being like, oh, like, I feel like I don't have enough time to like serve God. I'm in school. And I'll never forget, the young adult pastor at that time said, doing well in school honors God and it pleases God. And it changed my life. I was like, okay.
So simple.
Yeah, it was just really like, oh, I can honor him in this. And so I'm going to make sure I do well. I'm going to make sure that I just put him at the front of my school life, which is kind of weird that you wouldn't think about that, but I didn't until somebody told me.
That's really good, because I think that simplicity, because we go, got to have a job, want to have a job, maybe God has some kind of calling for me, but what about just my job? How do I look at it and go, God, how you want me to view it? And I think sometimes we overlook the scriptural idea and truth that we're just supposed to try to do really good work wherever we're at that benefits others, hopefully. And there's a lot of jobs you can have that are serving others directly or indirectly. But sometimes we don't make that connection. Like, I should do my job as unto the Lord, as a thing where I'm offering it to him. And I try to not be like some coworkers who are just grinding it out, doing the bare minimum, because it's so easy to slip into that mentality.
Right.
So that's really good. That seems like such simple and wise advice that you got at that time. And I think that applies to school because that was a part of your work in general.
In that season.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think kind of along the lines of what you were just saying, Garrett, about like it's beautiful to have that kind of freeing simplicity in a way to be able to maybe look at what you're doing currently like a little differently. I think it's important because for me, like when I became a Christian and stuff, it meant that so much of my life got infused with meaning that it didn't have before. You know what I mean? And I feel like that's what God wants to do and does, is he brings meaning to so many areas in our life that we feel like right now it's like I don't really understand, why I need to do this and like why I'm doing this, currently. But I do think you have a different meaning behind like being a student when you're a follower of Christ. Like you have a different meaning in so many of the work environments you could find yourself in. And one of the things that God really helped me with, and something I pass on to young adults a lot, is that like why you're doing something is more important than what you're doing necessarily, like especially along the path. For me, I spent like 8 years in the medical field. I always like joke with preaching, like I'll tell people like, hey, before I came to Christ, like I was selling drugs, and it's because I used to work in a pharmacy,
right. I got it.
And they always like look at me like, oh my gosh, like
what a testimony.
Yeah. But I worked for like 8 years in a pharmacy and stuff. And
It's so hard for me to imagine you in a pharmacy. I don't know why.
you can't picture.
I hope you don't take
the
offense to
lab coat
that
and stuff. Yeah. I probably didn't look. People probably didn't trust that they were getting what they were supposed to get when they came to my window. But anyway, like I worked in that that field for a little bit and for quite a bit actually as a young adult. And that was like, that's the season for me, that I was navigating some of these same questions. For me, coming to Christ, like I was in a season as a young adult where I was like saying, like, I just need what's real. I just need what's real, right? Not even necessarily looking for God, but then like that's where God just really came and interrupted me as a young adult and began to like lead me, into the things that, were good for me and all that. But yeah, I found myself in this season where I'm like working in the medical field. I had gotten that job really just because I needed to be able to pay bills because I was, living on my own and all that type of stuff. And so it was really just a practical, just meet my needs type of thing. But after giving my life to Christ, like I just started to find meaning in that work environment that wasn't there before. Like, especially as I started to, like, for me personally, like the way that God has led me has been into like full-time ministry and stuff, right? And that's something I never would have thought of when I was a teenager and things like that as the last thing, it's not what I was trying to pursue or whatever, but eventually as a young adult, that was what God like brought to me and put on my heart. And so that kind of way that we cliche, I think of calling oftentimes, right? It was like, I got this real just, I'm calling you to ministry. But no one was offering me like an opportunity to be in ministry, and they shouldn't have at that time, and all that. But it started to just be this thing where what I was doing was not as important as like why I was doing it, and just the fact of like showing up in my work environment, but just showing up with a different set of eyes and a different set of ears, and just an ability to be present with people and even care about the lives of people I worked with, and seeing how over time, like God led me into so many cool experiences with people I worked with, how, just by the time that my time was up being there, people in that pharmacy environment were like, Sam, you're the priest of this pharmacy, and it became this kind
Pastor
of like,
Sam
it was
not
a,
at the church yet.
Yeah, it was an interesting, kind of season and stuff, but I feel like so many times we miss how whatever you're doing right now, how it can be so full of meaning and purpose. God is using it, for so many things. Like there's that, overused kind of Karate Kid analogy, like where like Mr. Miyagi's, having him do the whole like wax on, wax off thing, right? But it's like, I don't get why I'm doing this. And then all of a sudden, like, okay, now I understand.
Yeah.
And I think you kind of have to see some things, as you're in this kind of journey that way, where it's like, I don't really fully understand yet why I'm still like working in this space or whatever. But I do feel like when it comes to work, when it comes to calling, stuff like that, it is a progressive revelation a lot of times.
Yeah.
And it is really about the relationship with the Lord and the walking with him through these things, and not just like, God, tell me exactly what I'm supposed to do so I could just run to it, God is way more interested in the relational kind of pathway into these things than the just practical one.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, there's certain things, no matter what you're doing right now, whether you're a student or you're working in a certain environment, God is using it for you, and he's shaping you through it. And there are ways that it's formative, and it can be more formative, I think, when you're more aware of the fact that it's like, God's with me right here in this. Like, there is a great purpose to this. So much of the work that we do genuinely is meant to be like worship to God, like when you mentioned it, like the beginning of the Bible, work is like right there front and center, and it doesn't begin with humans. It begins with God. Like, God's the one who is at work, right?
Good.
And we reflect him. And so like,
Really
obviously we're working and stuff. And so there's very few things people could be doing with their lives in this world that are just like, no, we can't redeem that.
Right.
The majority of things that people could find themselves doing are things that need to be done, that are a part of things that actually like God would, ordain people to do. They're necessary for people to do what God's ultimately commanded humanity to do.
Right.
And I think what needs to happen is more people who do it with a different why, and it's not necessarily just about like the, because God's not just calling pastors and missionaries and evangelists and stuff like that. Like, he's created teachers, and he's created
doctors and
Thank
people
goodness.
that are doing his work, but in
like,
different
I was just telling someone, I'm
areas.
like, my dentist is a Christian. Like, found that out. Like, that's awesome.
Right.
I want someone who like cleans my teeth to the glory of God. Like, my doctor, my primary care doctor is a Christian. It's like, that's great. I want someone who's doing this not
all
just
accidentally too.
Yeah,
He wasn't like, are they
I'm not
Christian?
like, I only go to you.
Right.
But I love the fact that that's happened, because it's like, they're not just there, Garrett, to secure the bag. They're
Secure the bag.
They're glorifying God.
Yeah, and they're like, I want to serve the person in front of me.
Yeah.
I want to do this in love. I want to do this in a way that honors and worships God. And I believe that whatever it is that you have right in front of you right now, whatever you could find give yourself to do, put your hands to work in, it can be something that you do to the glory of God. It can be a place where God meets you in it. And it may not be the end of the journey and where you ultimately fully see yourself for the rest of your life, but it's like, but don't miss the opportunity, of just how God wants to show up in that space and shape you there, but use you there as well.
Yeah. Garrett, how did you, I don't even think I know, did you always know you wanted to?
I was born in full-time ministry.
Wow.
I knew
That's
it.
amazing. Right out the womb. He really knitted you together.
No,
Just
well,
said-
my story, thanks for asking that. Thanks for being interested.
Yeah.
My story is a little different than like Sam's story, because when I was a teenager, I just had this radical encounter with God. And right away, I sensed that God was calling me into full-time vocational pastoral ministry one day. Mm-hmm. And so I'm 16 years old, and I know that that's the pathway. I also had an interesting wiring because, unlike most of my friends, I really wanted to work and be independent. And so I had a job. My first job was at 14. I started working at a grocery store at 16. And I had several jobs
Wait,
before
what grocery store?
Stater Brothers.
I did too.
No
at
way.
16.
Let's go.
That-
7
that-
years I worked there.
Wow.
I'm bummed. I always kick myself because it's union. And if I were to work 3 more years, I would have been vested. And eventually I would have been able to collect a check. But I couldn't.
Wow. You wanted to secure the bag.
Live and learn. Yeah, I did not
Yeah,
secure the
this
bag.
is all about money,
God-
really?
yeah,
Today?
that's
This
all
whole
that matters.
What we're
conversation
talking
is
about.
All
just
that matters. Yeah, that was actually one of my favorite jobs, though.
Okay.
Working at the grocery store.
It wasn't
And
mine,
then
but that's good for you. Great.
I did construction. I worked in sales. There was a period where I was working here at Cottonwood for 3 years. And at one point, I had a part-time job at the church and 2 other part-time jobs just to I don't know why I was doing that. Who knows? Trying to secure the bag.
What were you running from, Garrett?
Yeah. So my story is more that I wanted to work, and but the calling that I sensed just haunted me, and I knew I ended up taking a job at the church for a year, doing like administrative data entry in the TV ministry. And I was not good at it. I was horrible at
You're
it.
talking about here at Cottonwood.
Here at
Okay.
Cottonwood, yeah. And some of my old bosses might be listening to this, and they will confirm that I did not belong doing that. They graciously let me do the job. But I remember just knowing at the time, this is one step closer to where God wants me. And God just kind of told me, like, I know you don't necessarily love this, but just keep doing it because I have a plan. And so that's led to what I do now at the church. But so that's more my story. I think looking back, I was in a lot of the years where I was doing other jobs outside of the church, I did not have the mature biblical framework that we're talking about right now to view my work. I did kind of view it as this is in the way. This is an unnecessary problem in my life because it's not really what I'm called to do. And yeah, I didn't steward it very well, but I don't want to shame myself anymore, but that's a bit of my story.
Yeah.
But I'm loving this conversation, and my mind's going in like 15 different directions.
Yeah. Real quick.
Yeah, go ahead. Yeah.
I think what's cool, because even with like the 3 of us at this table, like you can see how God's done things so differently in each of our stories. But I think that that's kind of something that people can take comfort in, is the fact that it's like God kind of uniquely does this stuff. He understands our personalities, right? Garrett, I know you're a goal-driven person. You know what I mean? So like,
I've been told that.
yeah. So of course, like there would be this kind of side of that nature, in your process of this, right?
Yeah.
Nicole is very much this like woman who's like, I heard God speak and I act and stuff. So when Nicole feels like God's in something, she just moves. Like she's very much that type of person, right? And I'm just this kind of go with the flow, like kind of person who's out here like, God, I'm aimless. If you don't help me, like, who knows where I'll end up? Yeah. And so like,
Help
just,
us, Lord.
yeah. And I just see how like in my story is so different than so many people I know that I even was closely connected to as a young adult that also felt called to ministry and stuff, and how their routes into it and my route was very much this like, gracious, just doors opening, more of a relational process into calling, right? And it really, that makes sense for me. Like, and so it's that side of just understand that God knows who you are and he's placed the things in each of us and stuff. And so you can get some real good, like, takeaways, comfort nuggets from others, but at the same time, God really is wanting to walk with each of us in this part of our life,
absolutely.
and just help each of us in the way we are to come into things that he may have for us and stuff. But I do feel like ultimately it's just about that side of knowing that, God's with you in it all, and he'll get you. He'll get you there. Like, you don't need to be so paralyzed and stressed about this type of stuff.
Right. It's easy to go that route. I always, some of the metaphor I like to use, kind of a metaphor with, particularly with the young adults around this, is we want a job description for the rest of our lives, and instead God gives us about the next 3 steps in front of us. Yeah. He may plant a seed sometimes about the distant future, but he doesn't give us the entire roadmap. Gosh, that's frustrating to me, someone like me who's can be driven and goal-oriented and all that stuff. I want to know what the exact plan is. Right. I don't want there to be any risk. Yeah. I just give me the plan and I'll work it and it'll guarantee the results. And that's just not how a faith journey works. Right. And I think one of the things that I wanted to bring up that's related to what you both were saying is part of when we're talking about our work and finding meaning in our work and how is that even connected to the conversation of calling, you also have to throw into the mix seasons of life.
Right.
Absolutely.
What season am I in, and how do I view my season? I would say in a sober way. And it depends on your personality, like me and Sam are different. Sam's, a feather in the wind. That's what I'm saying.
I don't know how I feel about that, but okay.
I'm, this driven person who I'm slowing down now, but always wanted things to move quicker in my life than God ever was interested in. Yeah. He was never in a hurry with things. Mm-hmm. And so seasons for me have been difficult to discern because I'm like, God, this needs to happen now. So I mentioned, right. I started viewing my work as something in the way. And there was tons of missed opportunity for me with my jobs when I look back, particularly as it relates to who was there mm-hmm. that I overlooked because I was just so focused on where I thought I was going to go. And right. God was like, I've given you influence now with the people that are there now. But let's talk a little bit about seasons. How do we navigate? How do you talk with young adults about that? There's probably a lot involved with it. If you have any thoughts.
One thing I will say is, like you said, seasons, our life works in seasons, obviously. But I do think, like, young adulthood, it is a season where you are taking on more responsibility, but it's still a season of discovery, And I think you do have to identify the season. Otherwise, like, you can be frustrated with it, Like, if you feel like you're supposed to be in a different season than the one you're in, obviously this current season is not going to feel so great. When you can kind of name it, call it for what it is, it's definitely going to help you to live in it. And so, I do think, like, young adulthood, especially on the younger end of young adulthood, like, is absolutely about discovering a lot of things. My encouragement a lot of times with certain people is, like, just do something, like, just don't get in this space where you're just, like, doing nothing because you don't know exactly what to do yet.
But you're waiting. Are we waiting for the perfect scenario?
Yeah,
where the stars align, and is when you're that young, you don't know what you don't know. You don't realize, like, that almost never happens for anybody. Right. You know what I mean? Like, you're not going to win the lottery when it comes to, like, the perfect job. You probably just need to go work at the local store or whatever and just get going and do something.
Yeah, so Stater Brothers.
Stater Brothers, that's right.
In the heartland. Yeah.
The heartland.
But so I mean, you do need to start moving. Like, I feel like we want God to kind of lead us, right? And it's like, well, you need to start kind of moving and let him guide. Like, even with, like, Abram's, journey, right? In this, it's that, hey, I'll show you as you go.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And I do think it is that way a lot of times for us in these things. And I think, like, you really in this season, like, there's certain things for you to learn, there's certain things for you to gain and all that. But I feel like a lot of in young adulthood, you're still discovering certain things about yourself.
Yeah.
And God's trying to reveal stuff to you about who you are. Like, okay, cool. This is the stuff I thought coming out of high school that I wanted to go towards. It's very rare you come across an 18-year-old who's nailed it with, like, I am doing I know exactly what it is I'm supposed to do with the rest of my life. Most of the time, you're going to school and declaring a certain major only to find out I want nothing to do with that, or maybe changing it or whatever. Yeah. And I just am usually telling people, like, the fact that you don't know these answers is normal, and it's actually okay. And what's important is that you are more locked in with, like, relationship with the Lord. You're getting, plugged in, connected in certain ways that are going to be healthy for you
Right.
Yeah.
in developing that side, so that, when it comes to these other areas that you're trying to figure out, it is this thing that you're walking out with God, and just, you're gonna discover, hey, I'm good at this, not good at this,
Right.
not as passionate about this as I thought I was.
Right.
I'm actually finding that I'm passionate about this. And so, I think if you can identify the season, like in young adulthood, as like, I'm supposed to be discovering, quite a bit, it's definitely going to help.
Right.
We're in a very different season of life today,
But I would say
than we once were. And
but I would say, though, I would add to that by saying I do agree there is the young adult season is a discovery season, but I think part of the illusion when you're a young adult is eventually I'm going to have this all figured out.
right.
And you end up because I'm 42, I'm still discovering what the heck I'm supposed to do with my life.
Yeah.
And that sorry if that puts anybody off, but it's just the truth, because it's indicative of what does a true journey with God and work look like
Yeah.
Right.
over a long period of time.
Yeah, I love that you said that, because I think it is discovery, but it's very much transitional. You are in a setting, especially as a high schooler, where you sit next to the same people every day. Forming friendships, it's kind of easy. We're either doing a sport together, we're in this club together. We just sit next to each other, and I'm not really talkative, but eventually, because we're here every day, you open up, and then you exit that environment. And I think even people trying to form friendships, they build their identity around what someone else is doing, just for the sake of like wanting to belong. And I don't think that the older generation, we kind of do sometimes younger people a disservice, because we share a lot about how God has done something in our life, right? Like, you knew at 16, not realizing, or you need to figure out what you want to do with your life. And that's not everybody, but a lot of times in conversations with young adults, there's a lot of young adults feel a lot of pressure to kind of figure it out.
Right.
It's not always like, start school. If you realize it's not for you, like, you can change. If you're learning to hear God's voice, if you're kind of like, I don't know, I sat in a class and I realized, like, I think I want to, I don't know, be a dentist, but I thought I wanted to be a doctor. I don't know. There's not always this like trust the voice that you're believing is God speaking to you. So they'll just start to like lean on other voices. This is the voice of what my friend is telling me, or this is like what my parents are telling me. And I don't think that, of course, we honor our father and our mother, but I think just for me, very early on, there's a young couple who are still here at the church. And I remember they went through a breakup, and I was kind of like, well, this is what's going to happen. You guys are going to break up. You're going to find the Lord. You're probably not going to end up together. And that's okay. You're going to be close to God, because that was my story. And then God did something totally different in their life. And I felt like that was the first time where I was like, God, you can really do whatever you want. And
he is known for doing that.
Yeah. And so I think, we try to give wisdom and tell people, of course, like, honor your parents, have candid conversations with them. But at the end of the day, we want to empower them and tell them, like, he wants to speak to you and you can hear him.
Good.
You can. And really encouraging them to take those steps of faith to where they begin to establish that relationship with the Lord, where, again, like I kind of mentioned earlier, there's that security and there's that feeling of like, you're not going to let me walk off a cliff. Yeah. You won't let me. You will put a million signs in front of me before you let me do something kind of stupid. And I think there is this empowerment that needs to take place so that young adults, I think even adults, as you mentioned, because we're kind of all in this, where we just can get to the point where we're like, Lord, I know that I hear from you. Yeah. I know that you'll speak to me, and I trust that you will.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's great. Yeah. And I think God speaking to us about our work, our calling, our journey with that doesn't mean he will tell us everything all at once. Right. But I think we would all agree in our most of the time, at least in my experience, he tells us enough.
Yeah.
Because if, going back to that job description analogy, if he did just download a job description for us for the rest of our life, what would we need him for?
Right.
We would just be off to the races. Okay, I got it all now.
Right.
But we need intimacy with God, closeness to God to walk the thing out. But this, and then, okay, so seasons are important, because if we lift our heads a little bit and try to look at our lives from a bigger perspective, then we realize, okay, maybe I'm in a job I don't really like.
Yeah.
But what we could ask the question then, what purpose does God have me in this job right now? Well, it pays my bills. But someone brought it up, I can't remember, but I think a big thing in the mix of all this is, what is God doing in us?
Yeah.
Right.
Character-wise, spiritual formation-wise, how is he growing us?
Right.
Because sometimes what we want is, we think of Jesus's words when he said, I came that you would have life and have it more abundantly, which is absolutely true. But we can sometimes think that means that all the circumstances of my life get arranged in the most desirable ways that I think of right now. And more so, probably what God is trying to do in us to give us abundant life is to transform us
Right.
into different kinds of people, so that whether we're working at the pharmacy or Stater Brothers or teaching at the Muslim school or whatever it is, that we fill that up with meaning, because God fills it up with meaning, rather than I need a different job that gives me whatever, more money, more influence, more prominence, whatever it is that we sometimes are searching for. But if we understand the season, if we understand how God works, we can ask, what's the season I'm in? And then what is God trying to do in me? Because then what we don't realize is some of our deep desires are in alignment with God's will.
Right.
We're just not ready for that stuff yet.
Yeah.
And that can be true, honestly, in your 20s and your 30s and your 40s and your 50s, because there's transitions, as you mentioned, in every season of life.
Right.
The person who's about to retire might be I've never done that, obviously, but might be thinking, what now? What is my purpose? And of course, God has a plan, and it's highly likely that maybe they had a career for 30 years and God's been prepping them for what's next that whole time, unbeknownst to them. And so anyway, I like it. So we transitions. Let's talk about for a minute. It was brought up, but how relationships play a role in this sometimes or all the time. You're smiling, so you have something to say about that.
Yeah.
Talk to us.
What do you mean by relationship?
Oh yeah, good. That was kind of vague. That's kind of vague. So I think let me be more specific. I do think relationships are key in the church with people of like faith as we navigate the waters of, how do I view my work? How do I view my job? How do I view my calling? Super important. I think part of the answer to that question biblically is you don't do it alone. You need other people. But let's unpack a little bit. I mean, I have some of my own convictions on what kinds of relationships are helpful with this. I think an obvious one is, do you have someone who's just further down life's path than you that can help you look at your life objectively? Because if you need your peer relationships, but they don't know what you don't know. Because they're your peers and they just haven't lived through certain things. And so people that are 20 years older than me, for different spheres of life, but even for work, are just super helpful because they can speak from a place of been there, done that, but also often more spiritual maturity than we have. But anyway, anything else? You had that twinkle in your eye. I want to know what you were thinking when I brought up relationships.
Oh man. I think something I am coming to learn, especially because we are with young adults very often. We have a team. We're very close with our team. But I'm also a mom with 4 kids. And I think that a lot of times, at least for me, maybe in the last 10 years, it's like, who's your tribe? Who's your people? And I've realized there's a lot of different tribes and people.
I like
that. You cannot have enough friends and people. And I think that it's because in different areas of your life, you're going to need different people.
That's good.
The person I call when I have something to share about, vent about when it comes to being a mom is different than perhaps being a wife, than perhaps having a job here at the church. And I think, to your point, having people who are a little bit further along, but don't be so close-minded or, to think that can apply to many different areas. Like I actually had 2 young adults who just came over yesterday, the day before. They just want to be around. They just are like, I just want to see you be a mom and a wife, which is kind of interesting to me, but they want that. They're not in that season, but they're putting someone who's ahead, to your point, in their view to learn. And it has nothing to do with their job or even anything they're really in. But I think that the more we can kind of open ourselves up to different types of people based on the different things that we're interested in, based on the different things that we might even feel called to, man, I think that relationships, they're just so vital in just having a good model. Obviously, Jesus is our ultimate model, and I think there is huge value in a close circle for like those kind of deep things of life. But beyond that, I think that we can invite more people in.
Yeah, I agree 100%, particularly about the variety of kinds of people in our life. Because sometimes if you're like, well, I wish I had a mentor, and you find someone who's kind of like that, and then that's the only person you ever include in your life, which is can be helpful, but I agree with you. I've found it very helpful to have different kinds of people who serve, I guess that sounds selfish, but who serve different purposes in my life, you know?
I think I love the conversation or the question because relationships, in my opinion, are like the greatest resource, in so many ways. And I think God oftentimes, he is moving us towards relationships rather than away from them, right? And when I think about even for myself personally, like relationships are what ultimately even opened the door for me into so many of the things, that I've been able to come into and experience and all that. But I think it's important to have like the peer relationships. I see how like in our community, even certain peers help each other, not just in the side of like praying through stuff, comforting each other in some of the struggles of it all. It's not the easiest thing to find work as a young adult sometimes and all that. And so it's important you have that peer group. I've seen how people help each other to even like make resumes and all this type of stuff, right? It's like there's so many practical things,
Yeah.
Or hey, you got a job at that company.
Yeah,
Can you get me a job?
exactly.
Yeah.
I've seen one person, walk through a door and keep the door open for someone else.
Oh, you work at Stater Brothers? Give me a job at Stater Brothers.
In the heartland. And
it's the only place anybody can ever work. Sorry.
How are they doing? Do we need to buy stock in them? All right,
I think they're still around.
not with the market these days. Anyway, but yeah,
Trader Joe's is the way to go.
Yeah.
Yes. Oh, Trader Joe's.
Let's just change the conversation.
Sorry,
Just do
Sam.
a commercial
Totally
for you really quick. Trader Joe's is amazing.
But yeah. Anyway, just when it comes to the relationships, you can't have, I think, like Nicole said, enough, valuable relationships. Like obviously you're going to have certain people that you're like closest to, whatever. But yeah, having that person who's a little bit ahead of you, I think one thing could be a huge value. You don't necessarily have to have someone who like is doing the thing that you are trying to like do or whatever. That can be helpful for like, say like career mentorship or whatever.
Sure.
But I would say oftentimes, especially in the church, what can be available to you is having people who are ahead of you who just are going to look at these certain things in a way that's probably going to help you approach this season of your life or the work environment with more of a biblical, worldview and just kind of even seeing how God can be in the midst of it and stuff. And so just people who I think help you to live well in the midst of like your season but I think, yeah, like relationships are vital for your experience in this conversation around like workplace and faith and all that, because relationships help to remind you, as well. Like, yeah, just when you go to work, like it's not just about securing the bag. Like it's about, the fact that you're called in the sense of you're a Christian.
Yep.
Like if there's people,
yeah, you're on mission
where you're at,
Yeah.
then you have a calling essentially,
and your work, and
Yeah.
your work is inherently good. View
Yes.
your work as inherent. I mean, if you're working for a bad company who does bad things, that's another conversation.
right.
But viewing the work of your hands, the work of your mind, the work of your heart that you give your time to as a thing that actually brings glory to God.
Yeah.
That's a paradigm shift.
Yeah. And God actually describes it as a gift. Like work and having a job and stuff like that, like it's not a necessary evil, like it's an essential good. You know what I mean? Like
Yeah.
I think a lot of times we think about just being more like free from work. And I think even sometimes today it's like we want to be able to secure enough financial freedom to be like, I don't have to work anymore.
Just go lay on a beach.
Right.
Yeah.
I don't even think that that's like God's desire.
I think a lot of us would be miserable
Yeah,
if we
and
tried
there's-
that. After maybe for about a month, we'd be like, this is awesome. And then
Yeah.
we'd be bored out of our minds.
Yeah, there's actually some statistics around like people who retire and just kind of don't have, they retire at 65 or whatever, don't really have much that they kind of are doing after that, and just how it's actually negative against like their life,
and they can
life
even physically
expectancy
decline
and stuff like that. Yeah,
because of it. Yeah.
yeah, like God created us to be doing something, and all that. And I even think like with eternity, eternity is not about like an eternal vacation. It's actually vocation. Like,
Yeah.
there's things that we're going to be doing and all that. Like you're
Good.
always going to be in the midst of like actively like working, doing something. And I think, yeah, you want to be able to be learning how to experience kind of like this whole conversation, like faith and work, how your faith is actually directly in the midst of your work.
Yeah.
Like your work
They're not two separate things.
genuinely
Yeah.
is worship, can be, and so we need people who I think are going to help us see that.
That's great.
Yeah.
Great one-liner, by the way. Eternity is not about vacation, but vocation.
You're welcome.
You heard it first here, ladies and gentlemen.
I do want to share
Go for
something
it.
about just my young adulthood experience. And even why in the beginning I was just kind of like, I think that our security and relationship with God is so important because I think that a lot of times for me, I was always like in a relationship. And I really think that it distorted my identity.
You mean you were in a dating relationship?
Yes, a dating
Got it.
relationship. Because in talking about relationships, they affect so positively, but the wrong types of relationships I think can affect so negatively. I remember by the time God got a hold of me, I had ended this relationship. I knew that was the obedient thing to do. But I remember opening a note in my phone and just saying like, what does Nicole like? Because I felt like I didn't know myself.
Oh, I know what that's like. I know what that's
very
like.
much attached myself to where I was like, if you like that, I like that. You're into that, I'll be into that. I lost myself, and that's not everybody's experience, but it was mine. And I don't think that people just do it in dating relationships. People do it in friendships as well, especially unhealthy kind of toxic relationships and friendships. And I remember coming to the point, the bright side of it is, as we talked about, like God knitted and formed me in my mother's womb, and just really being like, okay, what does Nicole like and who am I? But really turning that to my relationship with God and that ultimate relationship, because he wants to tell you, he knows the works that he has like placed before you for you to walk in, right? And so I think that a lot of times those kind of toxic and negative relationships can delay. It can feel like a delay. And for a lot of people, you exit that relationship and you can look back and feel so like, gosh, what a waste. And I could have been doing all these things that I know God has been calling me to do, but God is such a redeemer of time. And I just have really felt that he didn't see that as a loss, but as something that he's used in my life regularly. And ultimately just turning my attention towards my relationship with him, it really helped me feel more secure in who I am and how I'm wired, which I think has given that confidence of the calling and the purpose that I have ultimately like in life, because we're called to different things, but our purpose is ultimately to bear his image.
That's
and
right.
for other people to come to know who God is through the fact that we represent him, you know?
Yeah. Yeah. I was, thank you for sharing that. I was thinking as you were talking, you know, everybody has a different journey with this. And I think that part of what I'm taking away from today's conversation, and I want to add something to it before we begin to kind of wrap this up. But you're going to have different seasons, and we don't have to have an expectation in every season that our job will be the perfect job, or that our job perfectly aligns with what we may sense God calling us to do, or what he's wired us to do. But we also have the freedom to try to align those two over a period of time. And to your story and your point about kind of getting to know yourself in your relationship with God, him revealing that to you, the uniqueness about who you are. I actually, I think of my wife, Julie, she's an RN manager. She became a nurse only because she felt like God called her to do that. And she was wired up to do that. And she absolutely is. I could never do it. And I'm sharing that to say she had other opportunities. She got to a place where she knew that was true, that she was supposed to pursue that vocation. And she had other opportunities to do other things. And she was secure enough to say, I'm not going to do that. Right. I'm not going to work at the church. I'm not going to do what other people think I should do. I'm going to do what God's uniquely wired me to do. And I think the hope for all of us in any season of life, part of the hope here, if you're frustrated, is that you may not get a perfect roadmap, but you can, as you seek God and pursue God, as you said earlier, Nicole, you can hear from God. And sometimes that's a process, and sometimes that takes days, months, years. But you can arrive at a place where not all your circumstances are aligned, but you have a clear sense on what might be next, the next steps you should take, whether that's I am absolutely called to this field, or God wants me to pursue a job or a career that's more aligned. But in the meantime, I'm going to do my job as unto the Lord. And I think you put all that together, and it's less daunting and less intimidating as Christ followers.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think before we kind of close, an important additional point, I guess, to the conversation is that when it comes to calling and things like that, you may not always find it to where your calling and lines up with what you get paid to do. You know what I'm saying? It's not always going to be this thing where it's man, that thing that I know God has put on my heart and called me to do is also the thing that pays my bills. That doesn't always happen.
Right.
I mean, Paul kind of chose to do that, but he's an example of that. He wasn't, being paid to necessarily be a missionary and an apostle and, and all that. He was choosing to actually continue to work as an artisan, and as a tent maker and all that. And I think it's important because for some people, you may have this reality of having a certain kind of career, right? And it's absolutely a place where there is still calling and purpose within that space and that environment. But then you also have this side of there's a place where God's mission and my passion come together, and it's not necessarily in what brings what my family needs or what I need, the income. That's perfectly fine. And there's actually a lot of people that are going to live that way, because there's a lot of people who gather at Cottonwood Church who are not on staff at the church.
Yeah.
And guess what? That's the way God would want it to be.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Right.
And so it's just that reality of the fact that like what your job is and stuff like that, like see the meaning, see like how God can form you in that space. It's still a place for fruitfulness where God is like working out like the fruit of his spirit in your life in that environment, where there's also fruitfulness of reaching lives in that environment. But there's also going to be other things, and calling is not just about like the lining up of I'm getting paid to do this thing that, you know, God's put on my heart to do.
Right.
And I think it's just important because, that's going to be where a lot of us find ourselves and may always like be, you know what I mean? It's not always that those two things line up.
Yep. So I think, big takeaway then, maybe to close it out, is God's called every Christian to do good work. Absolutely. And the work you're doing, unless it's just absolutely awful, you can do it in a way that it's good work and it glorifies God. Secondly, so everyone's called to do good work right where you're at, right in the season that you're at, right in the job that you're at. Sorry if that hurts you or it hits you the wrong way right now, but it's just true. Right. But take a step back, and it's also true that there's a call, there is individual callings on people's lives, and it's okay to pursue that. And it won't always be what you get a paycheck for, but it's okay if you want it to be that, and you want to pursue that, and you want to have that conversation with God. I think it's perfectly valid to have that value and have that desire, but know that it's a lifelong process, and every season's going to look different.
Yeah,
absolutely.
I agree.
Yeah.
Sam, Nicole, thank you for coming on and having this conversation. Appreciate it. It's been super good.
Yeah.
Thanks for having us.
We learned a lot. We learned about Stater Brothers. And Stater Brothers.
And securing the bag.
Basically,
securing the bag.
Hopefully a little bit about
what's in the bag. It's a mystery. Thanks, everybody, for listening. Hey, this isn't going to be the last time we talk about this subject. This is just the beginning. So tune in to the ones that are to come. See you next time. Hey, everyone. Thanks for listening in on this podcast. We appreciate it. And if you're enjoying this conversation and this topic, we want to let you know that in September 18th, that's a Wednesday, 6:30 p.m., we're doing another workshop around this conversation, this topic on work and faith and how we view our work. We're excited about it. We're going to have some really good teaching with even some breakout sessions that have to do with your specific field of work. So you won't want to miss it. That's September 18th, 6:30 p.m. We'll see you there.